A sneeze echoed. And then came the gunshot. Wolfe knew it wasn't random. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. Let's hear from you. Where are you joining us from? Comment below. Your voices bring this mystery community to life. Let's begin. When the doorbell rang at precisely 9:47 a.m. on a Wednesday, I knew two things instantly. One, it wasn't the mailman. He's always late and always whistling Sweet Adeline. And two, it wasn't someone expected. Wolfe doesn't schedule clients before lunch unless the house is on fire, and even then, he might insist it wait until Fritz finishes his scrambled eggs with Chervil. I was in the front room, flipping through photo play, and wondering whether a certain actress's hair was legally hers, when the bell buzzed again, more insistently. Fritz peeked out from the kitchen, eyebrows like punctuation marks. I'll get it, I told him. If it's a fire, tell Wolfe I tried to stomp it out with my charm. I opened the door and came face to face with a woman dressed in a pale grey wool coat, her mouth slightly parted, her eyes wide but not panicked. She was in her 30s, maybe, though the kind of 30s that come with dry martinis, late nights and money that doesn't have to clock in. Her gloves were kid leather, expensive. Her perfume was something herbal and clean, eucalyptus with a hint of fear. Mr. Goodwin, she asked, her voice a little shaky, like it had missed breakfast. You're in luck. The name's on the door, but I do take walk-ins. What's the trouble? It's about. She stopped, frowned, and blinked twice. I think someone's trying to kill my uncle, but it's not that simple. It never is, I said. Come in. I ushered her into the front from and closed the door behind her. Fritz retreated like a butler in a murder play, stage right. She sat on the settee like she wasn't sure furniture should still exist. I'm Cecily Boone. My uncle is Hamilton Byrne. He's, well, you may have heard of him. Real estate tycoon with a taste for third wives and first editions. I read the papers. She gave a grim smile. That's him. He's been acting strange, more paranoid than usual. 2 days ago, he asked me to take over his affairs if anything were to happen to him. Then last night, someone fired a shot at him, through his study window. I whistled low, and that doesn't qualify as attempted murder to the police. Oh, they chalked it up to a drunk with a bad aim. But I was there. There was a sneeze first. A sneeze, yes, just before the shot. From outside the window, loud and sudden, like someone in the bushes, trying to stay hidden and failing miserably. I didn't say anything right away. It wasn't every day you got handed a story like that before 10 a.m. And your uncle? I asked. He swore me to secrecy. He thinks he knows who it was, but refuses to tell me. He's been jumpy ever since. He insisted it was just a warning shot. Not exactly a love letter. I want to hire Mr. Wolfe, she said suddenly. I've read about him. My uncle would never agree, but I can't just sit and wait for another sneeze followed by a better aim. I leaned back and regarded her. She looked like she might unravel at the corners, but the stitching was still intact for now. You can ask, I said, but Wolfe doesn't lift a finger for warnings, unless they're about wine going corked. And even then, he might send me instead. I left her there and climbed the stairs to Wolfe's office. I didn't knock if he wanted solitude. He should have locked the door. He was in his chair naturally, yellow pajamas under a brown robe that looked like it had been folded by a valet with obsessive-compulsive tendencies. He was reading the Orchid Review with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice passing a constitutional clause. She says someone sneezed and then shot at her uncle. I began. She thinks it wasn't allergies. Wolfe looked up, one eyebrow climbing like a cat finding a higher perch. A sneeze, he said, followed by a bullet. That's the claim. Phooey, bring her up. Really? I blinked. That fast? She mentioned a sneeze. That suggests human error, and human error suggests motive, rooted in emotion, not design. Curious. I went back down, let Miss Boone collect her coat and composure, and escorted her upstairs. She stepped into Wolfe's office, like she'd entered a sanctuary, but didn't trust the priest. This is Mr. Wolfe, I said. If you're allergic to logic, this is your last chance to flee. She smiled faintly. Wolfe inclined his head a millimeter. Miss Boone, he said, you are not here merely because a sneeze interrupted a murder attempt. She blinked. No, I'm here because I think someone in his circle wants him dead, and they're not done trying. And you fear, Wolfe continued, that the next attempt will not be so punctuated. Yes. Then begin at the beginning, he said, steepling his fingers. Omit nothing you would rather conceal. She took a breath and nodded. And just like that, the brownstone had a disruption with perfume, property disputes, and a bullet that might have missed, but only just. And Wolfe had a case. Though he hadn't admitted it yet, I could see it in the way his lips pressed together, not irritation, calculation. As for me, I was already sharpening my pencils, and my instincts. Something told me this sneeze was going to echo louder than most gunshots. Her posture was too straight, her fingers coiled too tight in her lap, and her eyes kept flitting, not nervously but calculatingly from Wolfe to the bookshelves and back again, which made her exactly the kind of client Wolfe distrusted from the jump, the sort who had already edited their story 3 times before setting foot in the office. Still, Wolfe didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't blink, just watched her the way a falcon might study a finch with an attitude. "You will begin," he said, his voice calm and deep, "by describing your uncle's domestic and business arrangements. Who was present when the shot was fired?" She nodded, smoothed her gloves across her lap, as if they might help her organize her thoughts, and started. "There were 5 people in the house at the time," she said. "My uncle, myself, his valet Wilmer, the housekeeper, Mrs. Corral, and a dinner guest named Rory Heskett. Uncle Hamilton invited Rory, though I suspect it wasn't purely social. Why? Because Rory's a venture broker, loud, charming, and always conveniently available when Hamilton is in one of his expansion moods. This time he was talking about developing some waterfront property out past Far Rockaway." Wolfe grunted. I leaned against the bookshelf near the Globe bar, arms folded, watching her mouth as much as her eyes. Her story came smooth, but her gaze kept tightening every time she mentioned a name. "Describe the incident," Wolfe said. "We were in the study. I was across from Uncle, near the fire. He had just poured himself a whiskey. Rory had gone to the kitchen. He said he needed ice, though there was some already in the decanter. Then we heard it, a loud sneeze from outside. Just a single one. Sharp. 2 seconds later, the window behind Uncle's desk shattered."
"Was the bullet found?" Wolfe asked.
She shook her head. "No. The police scoured the room but found nothing. They think it lodged in the bookshelf, or ricocheted off the brass lamp. Uncle wouldn't let them pull the wall apart. And your uncle's reaction? He didn't move. He stood there, as if he'd been expecting it. That made Wolfe's eyes narrow slightly. Not much, but enough for me to notice. He adjusted his left pinky and clasped his hands again. He told the police it must have been a vagrant." She went. "That he heard a sneeze, then something backfiring on the street. He waved them off so fast it was practically suspicious. So why not tell them the truth?" I asked. She hesitated. "Because he's protecting someone. And you think you know who?" "No." Her mouth pressed into a line. "But I think it's someone close. And I think he doesn't believe they'll try again if he doesn't provoke them." "Naive," Wolfe murmured. "He's stubborn," she replied. "He thinks power makes you immune to consequence." That earned her a tiny twitch of Wolfe's eyebrow approval. "Maybe. Or recognition." I asked. "And this valet Wilmer? And this valet?"
"Quiet. Ex-military, I think. Keeps to himself. But he's loyal. The kind of loyal that's borderline eerie." "And the housekeeper?" I asked. "She's been with him 10 years. More like a warden than a cook. If someone dropped poison in the soup, I doubt she'd flinch until dessert." Wolfe closed his eyes, just for a second. I could tell he was constructing the floor plan of that study in his head, measuring lines of sight, acoustic ranges, the angle of the bullet, and the sneeze. When he opened them again, he said, "Mr. Goodwin will visit your uncle this afternoon." Her lips parted. "Uncle won't allow it. He'll send him away." Wolfe shrugged. "That is Archie's concern," I said. "Thanks." Wolfe continued. "Miss Boone, you are to remain available. Do not inform your uncle of this visit. Do not deviate from your schedule. Your presence here this morning is not to be mentioned." She frowned. "You're assuming someone's watching me." "No," Wolfe said. "I'm assuming someone is clever." I escorted her out shortly after that. On the stoop, she paused, one hand on the iron rail. "Miss Goodwin," she said, "if my uncle is hiding something, and you dig it up, will Mr. Wolfe use it even if it hurts him?" "If your uncle invited a bullet to dinner," I said, "I'd say the invitation's already been answered." Her mouth twitched. "He won't thank you for it. Neither do my shoes, but I still polish them." She stepped into a black sedan that was too modest for her coat, and I watched it slide down 35th Street with a hum before heading back inside. Wolfe was already in the kitchen by the time I got upstairs, chewing the end of a celery stalk and dictating the temperature at which Fritz should finish the boudin blanc for lunch. He didn't even look up when I came in. You will go to Mr. Burns' address at 3. Present yourself as a potential buyer. You wish to invest discreetly in waterfront redevelopment. You're joking. No. Take the Brigham folder from the lower right drawer. Adjust the contents. Add some compelling falsehoods. You want me to pass off a fake deal as bait. Not bait, he said. Perspective. See how they react to opportunity. Pressure compels truth faster than violence. Got it. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. And what if someone else sneezes while I'm there? He didn't smile. Wolfe doesn't smile when bullets are involved. Then do not inhale. At 3 o'clock sharp, I was standing in the arched doorway of Hamilton Burns' townhome off Sutton Place, folder in hand, and tie knotted tight enough to suggest both money and urgency. The place reeked of old power, high windows, over-trimmed ivy, and a butler who answered the door like I'd interrupted a funeral. I'm here to see Mr. Byrne, I said. Name's Willard Drake. Mutual contact, suggested he might be open to an offer. The butler didn't blink, but he did hold the door open just far enough to let me inside. The study was dim and wood-paneled, with a faint trace of smoke in the air, and one window still covered in plywood from the inside. Hamilton Byrne himself sat behind a marble-top desk, a tumbler in one hand, and a brow like a chiseled cliff. The kind of man who thought charm was a weakness, and greetings were optional. Investment, he said, without rising. That's the idea. I handed him the folder and waited while he flipped through it. From the corner, a younger man in a herringbone suit lounged like he owned the wallpaper. Rory Heskett, I assumed. He looked like the kind of guy who wouldn't sneeze, unless it made an entrance. Beside him near the bookshelves, stood Wilmer, the valet. He watched me like I might stain the carpet. I don't know you, Burns said. No, sir, but you know the numbers. Waterfront parcels, zoned and banked. I figured we could talk quietly off the books. His eyes flicked up, just for a second. But enough. He wasn't confused. He was trying to read why someone would send me, which meant he already suspected someone had. We'll talk, he said finally. Late. I nodded, took in the room once more. The distance from the shattered window to his chair, the odd alignment of the brass lamp he hadn't moved since the shooting, and made a note in my head. It was barely 3:30. I was in, and something in that study smelled wrong. And it wasn't just the eucalyptus. I didn't get shown out so much as drifted, like a leaf caught in a controlled breeze. The butler didn't touch me, but the pressure of him near my shoulder was all the encouragement I needed. Still, I wasn't in a rush. I let my feet shuffle slow across the foyer tiles, soaking in what I could. The echo of a recent carpet cleaning near the stairs, the glint of fresh polish on a bronze umbrella stand, and curiously, a faint chemical sting in the air that reminded me of a dentist tray. Not gun oil, not cleaning solvent, something else, sharper, sharpening. Outside I crossed the street and parked on a bench under an elm with a grudge against birds. From my angle, I could see the upper half of Burns' study window, or the plywood patch that passed for it. No sign of Rory or Wilmer, no sneezes, but the whole house felt like it was holding its breath, which meant Wolfe would want more than a folder exchange and a sniff. So I called Saul. He answered on the third ring, which meant he was either reading or tailing someone, with good taste in detour. I briefed him quick and to the point. Start with Burns' circle, I said. His third wife's out of the picture. Europe, I think. But find out who's been sniffing around lately. Real estate partners, rivals, maybe a long-lost nephew with an inheritance complex. Saul grunted his version of a yes. And the sneeze, he asked. Get me anything unusual in the immediate area that night. Pedestrians with cough syrup in their bloodstream. Street-level reports of loiterers or sounds in the hedges. No APD logged the call as a near miss. But I don't buy random. You rarely do. That's why I have you. I hung up and took the long way back to the brownstone, stopping only for a hunk of Gruyere from a delicatessen Wolfe approved of, because it didn't use cellophane. When I let myself in through the front door, Fritz was waiting like an anxious butler in a silent film. He said nothing, just tilted his head toward the office, which meant Wolfe had already set the table for conversation. Inside, Wolfe had left his chair only to migrate 6 inches forward. That was the Wolfe equivalent of pacing. The orchids glared at me from their perch like I owed them money. He looked up as I stepped in. Well, he asked. He played it cool, I said, settling in. Didn't ask who I was really working for, but his eyes. Rory Heskett was lounging like he knew where the bodies were buried, and Wilmer stood in the corner like a wax figure from the Hall of Military Posture. But here's the odd part. Wolfe's eyebrow lifted a micron, Byrne didn't seem surprised. Suspicious, yes, but not surprised. He's expecting something, just not sure what shape it'll take. The real act came from Rory. Wolfe grunted. Define. I introduced myself as Willard Drake, venture shark with a gift for numbers and no conscience. Rory didn't blink, but when I mentioned the parcel near Far Rockaway, his fingers clenched. Not much, just enough to say he wasn't thrilled I knew about it, which implies, Wolfe said, that he regards it as sensitive, or proprietary. Wolfe nodded, eyes narrow. Miss Boone said he was the one who stepped out for ice? Yup, 5 seconds before the sneeze. The timeline's tight, which may be why Byrne didn't flinch. He may have deduced the culprit before the police arrived, and decided to manage it privately, or protect it. Indeed, Wolfe closed his eyes, not to rest them, but to calculate. I gave him a minute, then cleared my throat. There's more. Something smelled off in that house, not metaphorically. A chemical scent, faint but distinct. Not ammonia, not bleach. He opened his eye. Describe it. Sweet, sharp, like dentist tools. Could have been antiseptic or a propellant. Maybe something someone used to clean up fast after, say, firing a shot. Not cording a shot. Nope. He leaned back. Then it may be unrelated. Or, very much, not. We were silent for a beat before Wolfe exhaled through his nose like a bull. Considering whether to charge. You will interview the other occupants, he said. Not tomorrow. Tonight. I blinked. Now, you will call Miss Boone. Secure a pretense. Something domestic, perhaps a second folder, an unsigned document. Return to the house. Observe the routine. If possible, isolate Rory Heskett. I want his conversational range tested. Got it. And the valet. Wilmer. Yes. Determine whether his loyalty is to Byrne or something else. Like a paycheck. Wolfe grunted, which meant I wasn't entirely wrong. I called Cecily from the front room. She picked up quickly, her voice low. Yes. It's me, I said. I need to come back over. I left something in your uncle's study. A file he probably hasn't noticed yet. She didn't hesitate. Half an hour. I'll leave the side door unlatched. And Archie, don't get caught. That made me grin. Always flattering when a lady thinks I might. I got to the house just after 7. The lights were low, the windows curtained, and the air smelled of lamb and tension. Cecily let me in without a word. She was in house clothes now, trousers and a knit pullover, no jewelry. She looked less like a worried niece, and more like a woman who could read a will and spot the loopholes before the ink dried. Library's clear, she murmured. Uncle's upstairs on a call. Rory's still here, lurking, as usual, and Wilmer just went out to get more wine. Perfect, I said. Let's start with the lurker. She led me into the sunken library, where Rory Heskett stood by the fireplace, swirling a glass of something dark and twice as expensive as his charm. He saw me and smirked. Drake, he said. Back already. Must be something in that proposal of yours that didn't add up. Just a follow-up, I said smoothly, but I'll take the compliment. Cecily disappeared tactfully. I circled Rory, half focused on conversation, half on spatial details, where the nearest window sat, where the carpet thinned, what angle the fireplace gave onto the backyard. You don't seem like a guy who waits on investors, I said. I don't, he replied. But Hamilton's a complicated man. Meaning he likes to test people before trusting them. I've been tested a lot lately. Tested how? He sipped. Asked to sit in on meetings, then not speak. Asked to pitch deals, then shut them down himself. He's erratic. Since when? Since the night someone tried to plug him through the study glass. There it was. No hesitation. He brought it up himself. Funny, I said. He told the cops it was just backfire. Rory shrugged. Cops don't always need the full script, but between you and me, I think he knows exactly who did it. He just doesn't want to admit they got that close, because it would make him look weak. Rory raised his glass. You do catch on fast. Footsteps padded behind me. Cecily returned with a bottle and a fresh glass. Wilmer's back, she said. Showtime, I murmured. She led me into the hall just as Wilmer was removing his coat by the foyer mirror. He didn't look surprised to see me. That was either good training or very bad. Evening, I said casually. Back from errands? Yes. Pick up anything besides wine? His lips twitched. A tin of lozenges. I blinked. Lozenges? I've had a tickle in my throat. Dry weather. Ah. Winter allergies. He paused. Something like that. I filed that away like a pressed flower. Odd, faintly fragrant, possibly lethal. When I returned to the brownstone at 9, Wolfe was in his chair, alone, sipping beer. He looked up as I entered. Well, I dropped my coat on the rack. Rory talks like a man with secrets but not guilt. Wilma's the one who mentioned lozenges. Unprompted. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. That is suggestive. And Cecily, I added. Cool under pressure. Calm in a storm. Maybe a little too calm. He set down his glass. Very well, the game has moved. Now let us see who sneezes next. The next morning started with Fritz's cornmeal muffins, and a prolonged silence from Wolfe, which was how I knew he was digesting something heavier than breakfast. He didn't open the Times immediately. He didn't complain about the precise butter to jam ratio. He just sat, big and still, fingers templed under his chin like he was conducting a thought orchestra. Only he could hear. I waited until the last sip of coffee before saying, Wilma's lozenges bothering you more than the shooter. Wolfe didn't open his eye. A man who claims throat irritation after a gunshot incident and coincides his errands with a wine run is either a fool or a liar. I do not believe Wilma is a fool. Fair. But he's also ex-military. He could sneeze, reload, and iron a shirt all at once. Wolfe opened his eyes now and looked at me with something close to irritation, which for Wolfe passed for high emotion. Your levity is unearned, Archie. You found the scent of a chemical compound, noted behavioral anomalies in both Heskett and Wilma, and identified no fewer than 3 parties withholding information. Miss Boone's uncle is either shielding a suspect or orchestrating a deception of his own, and yet there is no tangible act, no theft, no documentation of sabotage, only tension. I gave him a shrug. Then maybe it's all in their heads. No, his voice was soft but firm. It's in mine now, and I want it out. He reached toward the bell and rang for Fritz, not because Fritz was needed, but because routine was how Wolfe framed a plan. While Fritz materialized from the kitchen with something steaming and herbal, Wolfe gave me my next assignment. You will return this afternoon. Under the pretext of obtaining a signature for the fictional investment contract. Byrne's going to ask why I didn't send it by courier. Tell him you don't trust couriers, or windows. That earned a twitch of Wolfe's lips. Then, he continued, your objective is no longer to prod, it is to provoke. Provocation usually ends with a door in my face. Then wedge your foot accordingly. I left at 2 with a new folder, a light overcoat, and instructions to see what happened when I twisted the dial from inquiry to pressure. When I rang Byrne's bell, it was Wilma who answered, still expressionless, still molded out of unshakable loyalty or carefully mixed concrete. Miss Byrne is in the conservatory, he said. Follow me. This time he led me through a wing I hadn't seen before. Plants everywhere, vines, herbs, even a lemon tree whose fruit looked like it had been interviewed before being allowed to grow. Hamilton Byrne sat in a white wicker chair with a checked blanket over his knees, reading The Economist, like it owed him an apology. He didn't look up when I walked in. You persistent, he said. I'm thorough, I replied, taking the seat across from him. He glanced at the fold. That the contract. Revised terms. More aggressive than before. You might lose less if it all blows up. He chuckled without mirth. You came all the way here for that. No. I came to ask why you didn't let the police investigate the shooting fully. You've got a busted window, a worried niece, and a valet with a pharmacy in his coat pocket. Something doesn't add up. That got his eyes up. Cold. Steady. You're not just a pitchman, he said. Correct. I'm the guy you should have talked to before the bullet got fired. He folded the newspaper, slow and deliberate, and set it beside him. You think I don't know who you are? Depends. Do you think your niece acts without a reason? He nodded once. She's loyal, or scared. That one hit home. His jaw clenched. Not hard, but tight enough that I saw a nerve twitch beneath his temple. I didn't call the police, he said, because the police wouldn't understand. This wasn't about money. It was about history. History. He didn't answer. He stood slowly and walked to the lemon tree, adjusting a leaf that didn't need adjusting. You ever make a decision 20 years ago, he said, and realize too late that someone else never forgot it? Sure, I said. Usually at tax season. I heard someone once thought they got over it. Maybe they didn't. Who? He shook his head. Doesn't matter. Yes, it does. If they sneezed and missed, they might sneeze and hit next time. He smiled without mirth again. You really think I'd wait around for a second try? If you know who it is. Yeah. Because maybe it's someone you still think you can save. That stopped him. His shoulders dropped slightly. Then a voice cut through the foliage like a scalpel. Well, that's touching. It was Rory Hercule. He stepped into the conservatory from the opposite door, hands in his pockets, smirking like he'd just caught someone cheating at cards. Cicely said you were back, Rory said to me. I wondered what the angle was. Turns out it's guilt therapy. I stayed seated. Byrne didn't move either. Rory walked over to the lemon tree and leaned against it like he was being paid to look charming under citrus. So who's the poor soul you stepped on, Ham? That old partner who went bust. The architect you fired in '09. One of the wives. I said nothing. Byrne replied quiet. No, Rory said. But you never have to. You just leave, and let someone else pick up the bill. He looked at me now. You poking around won't help him. This house is a snake pit with antique rugs. Everyone here has a motive, including Cicely. That's so. She's next in line. You think she brought you here to help him? Or to confirm he's slipping? That didn't sound like pure speculation. It sounded practiced. Byrne straightened up. Leave it, Rory. Rory shook his head. No, you let this fester. Now we all have to smell it. Then he turned and walked out, muttering something under his breath about people who hire detectives instead of bodyguards. I turned to Byrne. You're not controlling this anymore. Someone else is. His expression didn't change. That may be true. Then let Wolfe help you. Why should I? Because the next bullet might not miss, I said. And the sneeze. That wasn't nerves. It was deliberate. Somebody knew the noise would startle you just enough to keep you still. It wasn't just a bad shot. It was a test run. Byrne looked at me then really. The last of the fog seemed to clear from behind his eyes. Fine, he said. Ask your questions. But not tonight. I need to prepare. For what? For the truth. I didn't push. I left him there in the lemon-scented quiet, staring into something that wasn't foliage. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair with a glass of beer, and an expression that said his brain was already 3 moves ahead of me. I reported everything. The chemical scent, Byrne's confession of regret, Rory's jab at Cicely, and the brewing tension that suggested secrets in all directions. Wolfe said nothing for a while. Then, history, he said. History often comes dressed as coincidence, but it leaves fingerprints. So, we dig, we wait, and we listen. To what? Wolfe's eyes glinted. To the next sneeze. It was sometime after midnight when the brownstone sighed its way into silence. Fritz's kitchen domain finally cleared, the orchids slumbering under their humidity tents, and Wolfe refusing to speak another word until breakfast. I retired to my room with a copy of Black Mask and half an ear tuned to the hum of late-night New York beyond the shutters. I'd just hit a story about a detective who solved a murder using only a deck of cards and a parrot, when my phone rang. Goodwin. Miss Goodwin, Cicely Boone said, and I could hear the tightness in her voice like a violin string being wound. Someone's been in the house. I sat up. Define in. Not a break-in. Nothing smashed. No signs of force. But something's been moved. What? My uncle's appointment ledger. He keeps a daily log, old-fashioned, handwritten. It was on his desk last night. Tonight it's gone. I was already putting on my jacket. What about Wilmer? He says he didn't see anything, but I don't think he's asleep. I swear he was in the hallway 2 hours ago. Anyone else notice? No. And Uncle won't admit it's missing. Says he moved it. But I checked. He didn't. Be there in 20. When I got there, the house was quiet, too quiet. For a place full of wealthy tension and a half-cooked murder attempt, it sounded more like a mausoleum than a mansion. Cicely let me in, barefoot and pale in a slate blue robe. We went straight to the study. You sure it was there? I asked. Absolutely, she said. He never locks it away. Says routine is security. Routine gets you shot through a window. She gave me a grim smile, then pointed to the desk. See, no dust pattern. Something was definitely there. The desk was walnut, dark and lacquered to a shine, and on the left blotter lay a faint rectangular outline, slightly cleaner than the surface around it, the ghost of an object recently removed. Nothing else disturbed. No, not that I can tell. Who knew the book existed? Me, Wilma, maybe Rory, and Uncle of course. I glanced around. The curtains were drawn, the air stale with varnish and whatever brand of worry her uncle wore like cologne. I checked the door lock. Not engaged. Then the windows, still reinforced with plywood from the first shot. Whoever took the ledger didn't come through a window. That left one conclusion. Someone already inside the house did it. She nodded. Or someone with a key. I turned toward her. Are you saying Wilma? I don't know. But he's always there. He doesn't cough. He doesn't yawn. He doesn't even blink unless you're looking directly at him. It's unnatural, or very professional. She crossed her arms, which makes it worse. I took another look around the room, then straightened. All right, I'll talk to Wilma. Again. But this time, I'll ask the kind of questions he won't be ready for. Be careful, she said. If he is hiding something, he won't like being backed into a corner. That's the idea. I left her there and went down the hall. The light under Wilma's door was still on. I knocked twice, firm. He opened it immediately, shirt still crisp, tie loosened, but tucked neatly. Mr. Goodwin, he said. I assume this isn't about wine. Not unless it's being used as ink remover. He gave me a look that wasn't quite confusion. Pardon. Let's skip the foreplay. Someone's been in the study. Took your boss's appointment book. You see anything? No. Anyone? He paused. Miss Boone was in the study around 9. I passed her in the hallway. Anyone else? I believe Mr. Heskett returned from his room to retrieve a scarf around 11. I can't verify his purpose. I was in my quarters, doors locked. Always. His tone was level, calm, unwavering. The kind of voice that got people through battlefield reports and IRS audits. And the ledger? I asked. Ever touch it? Once. Mr. Byrne asked me to correct an address. I copied it over with his fountain pen. Do you recall the ink color? He blinked. Yes. Blue-black. Waterman's. Why? Just curious if you noticed the ink splotch on the blotter. I lied. There wasn't one. He replied instantly. Exactly. Thanks, Wilma, I said. Sleep tight. He closed the door with the quiet finality of a man who keeps a very clean conscience. Or a very controlled one. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was still up. He was rereading Plutarch in the office, like insomnia was a myth. He looked up as I entered. Well, ledger's gone, I reported. No signs of entry. Byrne claims he moved it, but Cecily says otherwise. Dust imprint proves her right. Did you confront Wilma? Yeah, he gave me the same story a man under oath would give, with just enough detail to sound innocent and just enough polish to make you nervous. And Cecily? She looks worried, but not surprised. Wolfe steepled his fingers. I despise shadows cast in multiple directions. They blur the line between the source and the obstruction. The question is not who took the ledger. It is why it matters. Because it could contain something damning. Not necessarily. It may contain something missing. An omission is often more revealing than an inclusion. Then we need to know what was in it. He nodded. And for that, we need the person who compiled it. Hamilton Byrne. Precisely. I exhaled and ran a hand through my hair. Then we lean harder. No. We invite him. I stared at Wolfe. You want him to come here? Yes. I will not chase truths down corridors like a common gumshoe. If he wants my discretion, he will submit to my method. And if he refuses, Wolfe's eyes narrowed, then he will forfeit the advantage of insight and the protection it might have afforded. I made the call the next morning. Byrne's voice was scratchy like gravel in a silk bag. You want me to what? He said. To visit Mr. Wolfe. 1 hour. In his office. With your full attention. And if I say, then the next time someone sneezes near your window, don't call us. He was silent for a beat. Then I'll be there at 11. By 10:45, Fritz had cleared the office of any extraneous items, and laid out 2 coasters, one for Wolfe's beer and one for Byrne's probable refusal of anything offered. I positioned myself by the bookshelves again, not looming but not lounging. At 11:01, Hamilton Byrne entered the room. He looked tired, not in the usual rich man fatigue kind of way, but drained, like someone who'd stopped trusting sleep weeks ago. Wolfe inclined his head. Barely. Mr. Byrne, he said. Thank you for coming. Byrne settled into the red chair like it might bite. Let's be quick. Wolfe's gaze was steady. I doubt it. Tell me why conceal the loss of the appointment ledger. Byrne didn't flinch, because I didn't want to explain what wasn't in it. Wolfe's eyebrows rose slightly. Go on. There's an entry that should have been there. A meeting from 3 nights ago. I had dinner with someone I never wanted my niece to know about. Who? He sighed. My second wife. Clara. She's been back in town. I exchanged a glance with Wolfe. That hadn't been in Cecily's story. She claims to have information on a man from my past. Byrne continued. Someone I double-crossed during a land deal 15 years ago. She wouldn't say who, just that I should expect consequences. And you believed her? Wolfe asked. Yes. Clara never lies. She just curates. Wolfe leaned back. So, you didn't remove the ledger? No. Then someone else did. Likely to obscure that meeting. Byrne hesitated. Or make it look like I did. Wolfe nodded once. Then we are close, he said. Close to. Wolfe looked up, his eyes like ice on granite. To someone who knew about Clara, and doesn't want her remembered. Wolfe didn't speak again for a full 30 seconds after Byrne's revelation. Not a blink. Not a twitch. That was Wolfe's version of flipping a table in slow motion. I waited, hands loose in my pockets, while Hamilton Byrne sat stiff in the red chair, staring at the far wall like it owed him an apology. Finally, Wolfe said, Your second wife's reappearance. Why did you conceal it from Miss Boone? Because, Byrne replied, Cecily never liked Clara. Thought she was manipulative, which, to be fair, she was. But I didn't want to reopen old wounds. Cecily's been fragile lately. Phooey, Wolfe said softly. She's been clear-eyed and assertive. Hardly fragile. That threw Byrne. He shifted in his chair, lips thinning. You don't know her like I do. No, Wolfe said. I know her as she is, not as she was. That is the luxury of the detached observer. Now, this dinner, where did it take place? The Lambeth Club. Private room. Clara reserved it under her name. And the discussion. Byrne hesitated. She brought up a development project from 2009. A failed joint venture on Staten Island. I had 3 partners. One of them was a man named Sheldon Fisk. She said he'd resurfaced. Resurfaced how? By changing his name. Reinvented himself. She wouldn't say who he is now, but she hinted that I'd already met him. That landed like a dull thud between us. I stepped forward. You think one of your current associates is Fisk in disguise? Byrne didn't answer right away. Then, with a reluctant nod, he said, Possibly. And if it's true, that's the real threat. Fisk was brilliant, but vindictive, and patient. I glanced at Wolfe. He was already miles ahead, mentally combing through every detail like he was plucking lint from logic. When did you last see Clara? Wolfe asked. 3 nights ago. She left town. She claimed she was flying back to Montreal the next morning. Said she'd said what she needed to say. Wolfe grunted. And she's not answering calls, I presume. Byrne's silence confirmed it. You will provide us with her contact information, last known address, and any mutual acquaintances, Wolfe said. Archie will track her down. Now, immediately. I took the cue, grabbed my coat, and left the office without needing the rest of the paragraph. Wolfe was shifting to high gear, and when that happened, you moved fast or got left out of the chapter. The name Clara Byrne, née Lorimer, turned up 3 entries in my files, one in an old society column, where she was wearing mink and eyeing diamonds, one in a divorce record from 2012 that looked more like a business merger gone south, and one as a silent investor in a theater company that closed mid-season. But the address Wolfe wanted was a rental flat in Tribeca, owned by a Canadian shell company. She had expensive tastes, but a small footprint. I got there just after 1. The building was brick, modest, and vaguely pretentious. A concierge downstairs took one look at my face and decided I wasn't selling anything, which let me slide into the elevator without a fuss. Clara's apartment was on the 6th floor. I knocked, waited, knocked again. No answer. I checked the hallway, empty, and used a lockpick I'd picked up back when Wolfe had me pose as a locksmith's apprentice. for 6 days during a case involving forged mahogany antiques. The door popped open after a minute. The apartment was sleek, sharp, and unoccupied. At least recently. No suitcase in sight. The bed was made. The fridge was empty, except for bottled water and a half jar of Dijon mustard. What caught my eye, though, was the mail tray by the door. There were 3 items: a fashion catalogue, an overdue utility notice, and a note, handwritten, thick cream paper, no envelope. The message read, "You shouldn't have told him. He doesn't forget, and he doesn't miss twice." No signature, no date. I snapped a photo with my phone and left everything exactly where I found it. Then I did a slow, quiet sweep of the apartment, just to be sure. No laptop, no phone chargers, no signs of violence either, just absence. Back on the street, I called Wolfe. "She's gone," I said. "Tidy departure. But someone left her a warning. Read it." I did. There was a pause. Then Wolfe said, "Return immediate. We are no longer dealing in theory." When I stepped back into the brownstone at 2:30, Wolfe was on the phone with Saul Panzer, speaking in clipped Latin phrases that meant the conversation was about 3 layers deeper than I could follow. He hung up as I came in and gestured me toward the office. "Someone took the ledger," Wolfe said, "because it documented the meeting with Clara. That much is clear." I nodded. "And someone else, or perhaps the same person, warned her to keep quiet. But that means they knew where she was staying. That's not public info, which narrows the suspect pool to people with access to Burns' private affairs," I said. "So Cecily, Wilmer, and Heskett," Wolfe finished. "He's had free rein over Burns' recent venture, and if he is Fisk in disguise, then he just tried to murder his old partner under the nose of a dinner party." "Yes," Wolfe said, "and failed, which he won't accept for long." A silence stretched. Then Wolfe leaned forward. "It is time. We summon them. All of them." "Yes. Tell Miss Boone I require her presence at 6 o'clock. And instruct Mr. Byrne to bring Wilmer and Mr. Heskett. No excuses." "Understood. And Archie be armed with more than wit." I raised a brow. "You expect trouble?" "I expect resolution," Wolfe said. "And people are rarely at their best when caught." I made the calls. Cecily didn't hesitate. Neither did Byrne, though he sounded resigned. Wilmer offered only a clipped acknowledgement. Rory Heskett asked if this was about the investment or the melodrama. I told him he could choose when he got here. By 5:58, Fritz had laid out chairs, straightened the carpet, and lit the lamps that gave Wolfe's office the dignified glow of a private courtroom. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does for company. At 6:01, the front doorbell rang. I answered it, ushered them in one by one. Byrne, tired but composed. Cecily, tense but alert. Wilmer, unreadable. And finally Rory Heskett, smiling like this was a cocktail party. Without the cocktail, they filed into the office, each taking a chair facing Wolfe like suspects before a judge. Wolfe surveyed them without a word at first. Then calmly, he said, "Someone in this room has a history they wish erased, and someone in this room attempted murder to preserve that illusion." 4 faces, 4 reactions. Cecily blinked. Byrne clenched his jaw. Wilmer exhaled. And Rory smiled. Wolfe continued, "We shall begin with names. True names. Mr. Heskett, would you care to explain the significance of the alias Sheldon Fisk?" Rory's smile didn't fade, but it did change. It hardened, curled slightly at the edges. "I was wondering how long it would take," he said. Rory Heskett leaned back in the red leather chair like he'd just slipped out of a costume he no longer needed. The curve of his mouth was easy, but there was a flicker behind his eyes, a spark that came from being seen. Finally, after years of shadow play, he glanced at Byrne, then at Cecily, then finally at Wolfe. "Clever," he said. "I was starting to think your reputation was bloated." "I assure you," Wolfe said, "it is adequately inflated." No one in the room laughed. Byrne looked stunned, like the last domino had finally fallen, but he'd missed the moment it tipped. His face drained, and he sat forward slowly, hands gripping his knees. "Fisk," he said. "You're my Fisk." "I was," Rory Fisk replied, "before you ran off with the permits." and left the rest of us to catch the lawsuits. I was the idiot who believed in the plan. You were the genius who believed in himself. Genius.
Wolfe cut in with a calm, sharp tone that could shave glass. Mr. Fisk, you reinvented yourself under an assumed name. Your investments with Mr. Byrne were acts of infiltration, not enterprise. Fisk shrugged. I didn't plan to kill him, not at first. Cecily stiffened, her voice sharp. But you tried. He turned to her. Yes. And he was supposed to know it was me. The sneeze. That was the hint. A callback. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Explain. Fisk nodded. 15 years ago, we were touring the Staten Island site. Construction delay. Rats in the foundation. Bad day. I sneezed twice, and Hamilton made a joke about killing me if I brought the flu near his deal. It became a running gag. Byrne's voice was hoarse. That's why I wanted you to recognize it, Fisk said. Right before the glass shattered, there was silence. Heavy, oppressive. Wolfe's voice remained neutral. You missed. Barely. And then, I waited, Fisk said. You brushed it off, so I bided my time. Watched your paranoia grow. It was satisfying. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Then someone stole the ledger, not to erase your presence, but to erase Clara's. That made Byrne blink. Wait, what? She knew, Wolfe said. She told you she had information. The ledger would have proven her presence, her knowledge. That dinner, that meeting, and someone removed it to sever the thread before it could be pulled. Fisk looked confused. That wasn't me. Wolfe turned to the one person who hadn't moved much. Wilma. The valet's face was still, but the kind of stillness that comes from conscious effort, not calm. You took the ledger, Wolfe said. Wilma didn't reply. I imagine, Wolfe continued, that you recognized Fisk the moment he entered your employ. Military memory, facial patterns. But loyalty binds you to Mr. Byrne. So you watched, waited, and when Clara appeared, you saw her as the loose end he couldn't afford. Byrne looked sharply at Wilma. You knew. Wilma's voice was low. Yes, sir. For how long? Since his first meeting, 3 years ago. He changed the way he walked, talked, dressed, but the eyes don't lie. Especially angry ones. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't have proof, and I knew you wouldn't believe me without it. Wolfe steepled his fingers, and when Clara reappeared, Wilma looked down. I followed her, found the note, knew someone else was already tightening the noose, so I took the ledger before anyone else could. To protect Mr. Byrne, Wolfe said. Yes. I didn't know whether Clara would speak. I hoped she'd leave quietly. When she didn't, I considered other options. Did you write the warning note? I asked. No. Then who did? Cecily asked, voice shaking. The silence hung again, until Wolfe slowly turned his head. To her. Miss Boone, he said very softly. Did you visit Clara? Her mouth parted. She stared at him, eyes wide. I what? Wolfe didn't blink. Clara left New York early. Yes, but not voluntarily. Someone confronted her, warned her, left her a note, one she didn't mention to Mr. Byrne, because she didn't want to be implicated in what was now a very dangerous game. That wasn't me, Cecily said, rising slightly. No, Wolfe asked. Then how did you know about the ledger before it was missing? I saw it, she said quickly. Before the dinner, I remember. You described its position on the desk in detail, Wolfe said, including the lack of a dust mark, which would not have been visible unless the book had been recently removed. She paled. You visited Clara, Wolfe continued, and told her to disappear. You warned her someone might hurt her, and in so doing, you tried to protect your uncle. Byrne was on his feet now. Cecily, you. She turned to him, her eyes blazing. You were spiraling. You were letting Rory Fisk back into your life. Clara was dredging up history. I didn't want to see you unravel. You've spent years building walls, uncle, and now you're letting ghosts walk through them. Byrne's mouth worked for words, but none came. You didn't want Wolfe, Cecily went on. You wanted silence. I tried to give you that, but you endangered her, Wolfe said. No, she whispered. I saved her.
I made her run. Wolfe sighed. So, we have a would-be killer, a vigilant valet, a vanishing ex-wife, and a niece with misplaced courage. Fisk stood, slow and steady. So what now? Wolfe leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Now, you walk out of here, Mr. Fisk, and you disappear again. You attempted murder. We have no bullet, no residue, no witness, no case. Fisk blinked. Wolfe went on. But if Byrne dies suddenly, or Cecily trips on a stair, or Wilma swallows anything suspicious, I will personally ensure the NYPD devotes every waking hour to tracing your blood, breath and ancestors. Fisk nodded once. Understood. He turned, walked to the door, and didn't look back. Wilma followed, silent as ever. Byrne sat back down like a man unstrung. And Cecily, she looked at Wolfe with something that wasn't gratitude. Exactly. But maybe something close to understanding. Wolfe exhaled, slow and deep. Fritz, he bellowed. When Fritz entered with the tray, the tension dissipated like steam. Byrne finally spoke. You saved me. No, Wolfe said. You survived. I merely observed. I walked him out with Cecily. The air outside was cooler than expected, and she lingered on the stoop, staring at the sky. I thought I could fix it quietly, she said. Quiet rarely equals safe, I told her. She nodded. When I returned inside, Wolfe was already eating eggs, toast, liver pâté, the usual parade. You going to make a moral pronouncement? I asked, flopping into my chair. Yes, he said between bites. Betrayal festers, concealment invites it, and vengeance, when patient, becomes indistinguishable from justice, until it misfires. I raised my glass of milk. Cheers. There. He reached for the mustard, and just like that, the brownstone was quiet again. The next morning was draped in a kind of calm that didn't feel earned. It was the hush after a brawl at sea. Everything around you still, but the deck still wet with consequences. Wolfe, of course, showed no outward sign of lingering storm. He took breakfast precisely at 9. As always, porridge and poached eggs garnished with an indecent amount of butter. I joined him late, coffee in hand, still wondering if I'd dreamt the parade of confessions that had marched through the office the night before. You think Fisk really meant to miss? I asked as I sat down. Wolfe looked up from his eggs, with disdain, as if I'd asked whether the moon preferred jazz or waltz. No one devises a symbolic sneeze and fires through laminated glass, unless they mean to kill. He missed because rage, even finely aged, makes for poor aim. So why'd he aim? Because I permitted it. I nodded slowly, letting that settle. Still think he's gone for good? No, but he will not return soon. He has been seen, which, in Wolfe's taxonomy of justice, meant the balance had been reset. Wolfe didn't seek punishment so much as containment. Once the pattern was exposed, the wound named, the rest was inertia. But I couldn't quite shake the sense that not all threads were tied off. Cecily, I said. You buying her story? Yes, Wolfe said without pause. Even though she tampered with a witness, she did not tamper. She pleaded. That is a different sin. Still nearly blew the lid off. And yet, Wolfe replied, the lid remains. Her actions were impetuous, but not malicious. She misjudged the volatility of Clara Byrne, and underestimated Mr. Fisk's appetite for reckoning. But she acted out of misdirected protection, not concealment. I leaned back, drumming fingers on the table. And Wilma? Wolfe lifted a brow. You object to loyalty, not as a concept, but the guy's like a tuxedoed wall, one gust of wind, and he vanishes. Wolfe grunted. If all secrets were shouted, I would be unemployed. I let that one pass, sipping my coffee while Fritz moved silently around the kitchen, refilling sugar bowls like an invisible stagehand, preparing for act. At 10:30 the phone rang. I picked it up. Goodwin. The voice on the other end was low and familiar. This is Clara Byrne. I sat up. You're not in Montreal? No, I never left New York. But someone broke into my apartment. I found the door latch, scraped, and the window screen loosened. When? Last night, around 2. Why are you calling now? Because I didn't know who else would listen. I was told to stay quiet. I did, but I'm not going to disappear for the rest of my life. Because two men can't finish a grudge properly. Fair enough. I said. Where are you? A hotel in Midtown, rooms under a different name. I'm not giving it to you over the phone. Smart. There was a pause. Can I talk to Mr. Wolfe? She asked. You're talking to his ears. He doesn't do phones. A longer pause. Then tell him I want to meet. Not to dredge up guilt, to end it. I relayed the request to Wolfe. After I hung up, he was already halfway through Le Carnet d'Orchidée and showed no surprise. Arrange a meeting, he said. Neutral ground. Inform her. I will not travel. She may come here, under protection. You trust her not to bring a second sneeze. She will not. She has seen what silence purchases. We set the meeting for 3 that afternoon. Fritz freshened the office, aired out the room, and placed a vase of orchids on the side table. Wolfe's only concession to hospitality. Clara arrived precisely on time, dressed in a charcoal grey coat and black gloves, her eyes shaded behind tortoise-shell sunglasses. She removed them only once she sat in the red chair, and when she did, I saw the fine stress lines that hadn't been there in her society photos a decade ago. But the spine was still straight, the tone cool and deliberate. Mr. Wolfe, she said. Thank you. Wolfe inclined his head slightly. Madam, I came to explain myself, and not to seek absolution. I know what I set in motion. You misjudged Mr. Fisk, Wolfe said. I misjudged a lot of things. I thought Hamilton needed warning. I didn't realize Fisk had gone from sulking to planning. You saw an old grudge becoming a fresh threat, Wolfe said. But you miscalculated its velocity. She smiled faintly. That's an elegant way of putting it. No, Wolfe said. It is accurate. You did not intend for a gun to be fired, but you placed the fuel beside the flame. I've stayed hidden, she said. But now I think I have something you should know. I exchanged a glance with Wolfe. He nodded once. Clara took a breath. It wasn't just about the development deal. Fisk wasn't acting alone. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Explain. There was someone backing him, not financially, emotionally, feeding him information, framing his re-entry into Hamilton's life. Who? I asked. Clara met my gaze. A man named Alden Price. Wolfe made a sound, not a word, not a grunt, but a flick of recognition. I said, never heard of him. You wouldn't. He died 7 years ago. Wolfe sat back, absorbing that. Clara went on. He was one of the other partners in that failed venture. Fisk always blamed Hamilton, but Alden was the one who snapped. He lost everything, and he told Fisk before he died that Byrne was the devil in the suit, that if Fisk ever got a second chance, he should destroy him slowly, and Fisk took it as gospel. I said, yes, and when I reappeared, it wasn't just to warn Hamilton, it was to stop that legacy. You failed, Wolfe said simply. I know, but maybe not completely. Fisk is out of the picture. Hamilton knows the truth, and now, so do you. She wrote, unless you need anything else. Wolfe said nothing, so I stood, walked her to the door, and watched her disappear into the crisp afternoon air like a ghost dismissed from duty. When I came back in, Wolfe was motionless, fingers steepled. Well, she told the truth, he said, but not all of it. About what? About guilt. Wolfe said, she still carries it, but she has done what she can. I sat down, and that's enough. For now, we didn't get any more visitors that day. No more no more symbolic sneezes, just the quiet return of order, the kind Wolfe liked best. At dinner, Fritz served duck à l'orange, with roasted fennel, and Wolfe didn't comment once on the seasoning, which in our world was a standing ovation. Later, as I stood in the doorway of the office, watching Wolfe savor a final sip of beer, I said, you know, you're right. About. People do strange things for revenge, even stranger things to avoid it. Wolfe nodded, staring into the bubbles in his glass, like they might form a postscript. Justice, he said, is not symmetry, it is clarity. Good line, I said. Want me to stitch it onto a pillow? He made a face, and waved me out of the room. Behind me, the brownstone settled back into its sacred silence, and for the first time in a week, nobody sneezed. The following day brought rain, not the theatrical kind that drums meaning into window panes, but the drab, persistent kind that New Yorkers ignore on principle. I'd finished my second cup of coffee, and was watching a rivulet slide down the kitchen window, when Wolfe rang for me. That's not poetic, it's literal, He used the buzzer on his desk, summoning me like a schoolmaster, ready to recite a list of misdemeanors. He didn't look up when I entered the office. He was rereading Cato Major de Senectute, a Latin treatise on old age, which I didn't think was a cry for help. But you never know with Wolfe. We have unfinished business, he said without preamble. I thought Fisk was the finale. No, he was the catalyst. That caught my attention. You mean someone else was still steering this? I mean, Wolfe said, closing the book with a soft thump. We have yet to identify the hand that moved the ledger. I blinked. You said Wilmer did it. He did. Wolfe agreed, but not on his own initiative. That made me pause. You're saying someone told Wilmer to take it? Not directly. That would require a kind of bluntness incompatible with Wilmer's temperament. But someone allowed him to believe it was necessary, shaped his perception. I ran a mental list of all the usual suspects. You think it was Cecily? You think it was...
No. Clara? No. Clara tried to end a feud, not deepen it. I frowned. Then who? Wolfe reached for a folder on his desk. While you were in the kitchen contributing nothing to the culinary arts, I asked Saul Panzer to dig further into Miss Burns' professional past, specifically, the entities connected to the Staten Island deal. And he slid the folder toward me. Inside were 3 names. 2 I recognized, Fisk and Alden Price. The third, Norman Wexley. Never heard of him, I said. You wouldn't have. He was the project's silent financier, moved through holding companies, obscured his presence. But he was the initial spark, the man who brought the others together, lured them in with promises, then stepped back when it fell apart. I nodded slowly, so he was the matchmaker in the fire. Precisely. And when it collapsed, he vanished. But not entirely. He didn't just disappear. He reinvented himself. Or rather, his interests did. Wolfe gestured toward another sheet in the file. I picked it up. A list of shell companies, real estate ventures, charities, consulting firms, and near the bottom, one name stood out. The Boone Wexley Foundation. I stared. Boone, as in Cecily. Yes. Wexley married her mother's sister, her late aunt. Cecily inherited part of the estate. The foundation has been funding small redevelopment projects for years, quietly and always with a particular interest in legacy. You think he was behind the scenes this whole time? I think he still is. And I think he's been using Cecily to broker proximity. That stopped me cold. You think she knew? No, Wolfe said. I think she's been used, Mr. Goodwin, as a well-placed pawn by a man who understands emotional leverage. I dropped into the chair opposite him. So Wexley sets this all in motion. Fisk re-emerges. Clara reappears. Byrne panics. And Wilmer acts. But the entire design, that's Wexley. Yes. And what does he want? To ruin Byrne? Possibly. To see the old empire crumble? Likely. But most of all, I believe he wanted the ledger. Not because of its content, but because of what it represented. I frowned. Symbolic sabotage. Yes. A surgical excision of history. It allowed him to rewrite the narrative, make it seem as though Fisk had re-entered Byrne's life naturally, inevitably. I shook my head. That's elaborate. Vengeance usually is. When it's this quiet, it's also usually successful. The buzzer rang at that moment. Our upstairs chime. Fritz's voice came over the intercom. Miss Boone is here. Show her in, Wolfe said. She entered a moment later, rain clinging to her coat and something unreadable in her expression. I came to say thank you, she said. Wolfe nodded. You're welcome. But she added, I also came to tell you I'm leaving. Leaving New York. She nodded. For a while. There's a property in Charleston I inherited from my mother's side. I've never seen it. Figured now's a good time to disappear. Wolfe studied her. You are not running. No, she said. But I am. Untangled. She handed me an envelope. For you, she said. I opened it. Inside was a check made out to Wolfe. Large enough to sponsor a dozen orchid expeditions. I don't want to forget what happened, she said. But I want to honor it. By doing better. Wolfe inclined his head. A rare sentiment. She gave a faint smile. Be well, gentlemen. And then she left. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, you going to cash that? Of course. I'm not a philosopher. We didn't hear from Fisk again. Clara sent a postcard 3 weeks later from Portugal with no return address. And only 3 words. You were right. Byrne resumed his empire. Smaller and quieter. Wilmer stayed on. No one sneezed. That night, as Fritz served us roasted duck legs with fennel and sherry-glazed turnips,
Wolfe leaned back and looked satisfied for the first time in days. People believe truth is sharp, he said. But in practice it is like steam visible only in the right light. And sometimes it burns, I added. Wolfe grunted. We ate in silence. Justice hadn't been loud, but it had been thorough. And in the brownstone at least, history would not be erased. Wolfe was in an uncharacteristically expansive mood the next morning. Not cheerful, heaven forbid, but expansive in the sense that he allowed conversation to drift beyond orchids, vinegar ratios and the criminal uses of inferior paprika. He even tolerated my presence in the plant rooms, while he misted a batch of odontoglossum seedlings, which meant either the world had tilted, or the latest case had scratched an itch deeper than even he could admit. I leaned against the far bench, watching him work with slow, methodical grace. Wolfe and orchids were the only relationship I'd ever seen that operated on mutual respect and no small measure of judgment. So, I said, you still think Wexley orchestrated the whole affair? Wolfe didn't look up. He created the condition. He fanned old embers, nudged volatile men toward volatile ends. That is orchestration. But you let him go. I had no proof. Would you have wanted any? He paused with a tiny orchid sprayer in hand, considering. No, he said at last. Exposure is often more effective than indictment. Wexley lives now in the shadow of his own manipulation. I doubt he'll try again. And if he does, he'll sneeze louder. Wolfe gave me a withering glance. Must you be flippant in all things? Yeah, it's the only reason I survived this job. He turned back to his plants. Then at least be flippant usefully. Tell me what you observed during Miss Boone's final visit. I thought back, calm, poised. But she was concealing something. Not guilt, not fear. Resolve, like someone who's made a promise they don't expect to keep. Wolfe nodded faintly. She is untethered now. Her actions removed her from the roles she once played. Niece, heir, even protector. It will take time for her to reinvent herself. You're sentimental. I'm observant. Same difference. He shut the sprayer and moved to the central table. And Byrne, still wary, he called last night asking if you'd reconsider a full security assessment of his staff. I declined. I told him you would. We stood in silence for a moment. The orchids breathed their damp, heady perfume around us. Wolfe gestured toward the door with the grace of a man giving permission to a bird to fly south. I'm done here, he said. We will have coffee in the office. I returned to my usual chair as Fritz entered with the tray. 2 cups. Sugar, no cream. Wolfe settled in with a grunt of satisfaction and sipped as if caffeine had been invented solely for the civilized. After a moment he said, You understand why I permitted Mr. Fisk to walk? Sure, I said. You knew the threat was spent. Partially. But more importantly, his presence would have distracted from the actual question, which was, why Hamilton Byrne permitted himself to be infiltrated. I raised an eyebrow. You think he wanted Fisk close? No. But I think he needed it. Byrne's empire was built on ruthless control. At some level, he sensed that history had never fully exhaled. Fisk was a reckoning. Byrne chose not to fight him directly, because he believed some portion of the punishment was deserved. Guilt, recognition. There's a difference. I nodded slowly. So the real mystery wasn't about the sneeze. It was about who needed to hear it. Wolfe gave a small, pleased grunt. Yes. The phone rang before either of us could sip again. I picked it up. Goodwin, a warm, unfamiliar voice. Hello, Mr. Goodwin. My name is Eleanor Vey. I'm the editor-in-chief at Modern Estates magazine. Sounds thrilling. She laughed. I was wondering if Mr. Wolfe might agree to an interview. A quiet piece, not a profile. Just a reflection on discretion in modern detective work. We'd be delighted to frame it around his passion for orchids. I glanced at Wolfe. He had already lifted an eyebrow in protest. Miss Vey, I said, I have to inform you that Mr. Wolfe does not consent to publicity. It gives him indigestion. Even a one-page feature. We'd send a photographer. That earned an audible furry from Wolfe, who waved his hand as though shooing away an imaginary vulture. I'm afraid that's a firm no, but if you ever need a quote about fertilizer ratios, or the criminal misuse of mayonnaise, I can send you his pamphlet. We ended the call cordially. Wolfe scowled into his coffee. A photographer, he muttered. Ghastly people. I grinned. You're getting popular. That is not an achievement. There was a quiet knock at the front door. Not a buzz. Not a shout. Just two calm knocks. I answered it. Standing on the stoop was a man in a green wool coat, eyes sharp, hands gloved, holding a sealed manila envelope. "Delivery for Mr. Wolfe," he said. I took it, and he was gone before I could even offer a receipt. Back in the office, Wolfe examined the envelope like it might contain anthrax. He slit it open with a brass blade and pulled out a single page. A typed note. "To the man who chose exposure over judgment. Thank you. Consider this the final page of a story I should never have started. Enclosed is the deed to the Far Rockaway tract. Signed over to Cecily Boone. No strings. Only closure. F." Wolfe folded the note once, precisely, and set it aside. "Fisk?" I asked. "Yes. And the deed, I will forward it to Miss Boone." He took a long sip of coffee and stared out the window at the slick grey of the city. "So," I said, "is that really the end?" "No, Archie. But it is a pause." And with that, he opened the Times. I opened a crossword, and the brownstone returned to its native rhythm. Silent, watchful, and never truly still. The rain tapered off, 3 days later, as if the sky had finally lost interest. Wolfe was back to his morning routine, sipping saffron-laced broth in the plant rooms, while lecturing the orchids on the folly of uneven humidity. I was half a column into a post story about a jewel theft in Midtown, when the phone rang. This time, it wasn't a crisis, a confession, or a call from someone with a pistol in their past. It was Cecily. "I got the deed," she said. "No note. Just the document. Legally executed. Signed with what looks like a real hand." "It was real," I said. "The last echo of a man who spent years sharpening silence into a weapon. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. You survived it." There was a long pause. "Do you think he meant it? The gift?" I thought of Fisk's note. No strings. Only closure. "I think," I said, "he wanted to write his own ending, before someone else did." She exhaled. "Will you thank Mr. Wolfe?" "Not. Unless you want a lecture on the dangers of emotional gratitude." I relayed the conversation to Wolfe in the plant room, where he was delicately repositioning a cluster of Paphiopetilim orchids. He didn't look up. "She will do well," he said. "The property will tie her to something enduring. A living record. Far preferable to vengeance or flight." "Funny," I said. "A failed murder plot, and an old betrayal ended up building her a future." "That is not irony," Wolfe replied. "That is balance." We returned to the office for lunch. Fritz had prepared duck liver mousse on toast points, and a consommé so clear it could have doubled as a window pane. Wolfe ate slowly, savoring. Then he folded his napkin and looked at me as though he'd come to a verdict. "This was not a case about crime," he said. "It was a case about memory." "Yeah?" "Yes. About the ways people preserve it, falsify it, weaponize it." Fisk sought justice, but what he wanted was control. Byrne feared exposure, but what he needed was confrontation. And Cecily, she mistook silence for safety. And you, I remembered something most people forget. That truth, however delayed, arrives with impeccable timing, even if it sneezes first. Wolfe's eyes flicked toward me, half-lidded. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Never say that again." I grinned and poured myself another cup of coffee. The city moved on. Byrne reclaimed his boardroom, with a few new security cameras, and a slightly shorter guest list. Clara Byrne stayed abroad, sending back the occasional cryptic postcard. Fisk vanished into the ether, richer in regret and poorer in purpose. Cecily sent Wolfe a book of heirloom orchid prints, inscribed with a simple line, "Thank you for letting me remember on my own terms." As for Wolfe, he took no new clients for the rest of the month, not because of burnout, or fear, or even disdain, but because, in his words, the world has already told its story for now. One night, as I was locking up, he called out from the office, "Archie, yeah, you've been remarkably competent lately." That sounds dangerously close to a compliment. It is not. It is an observation. Compliments are for peacocks. And that, I decided, was the warmest thing he'd ever said. Outside, the rain began again, this time softer, like a coda, and inside the brownstone, all was still, until the next knock. Until the next silence.